Hey everybody, welcome back to Fun with Fallen Flags. This is episode 32. So to backtrack a little bit, on episode 27 we created the Walthers block tower. So I really like the colors, it seemed to work really well. It's Pennsylvania Railroad structure, it's going to work great with the layout. And then I decided to take a step backwards and work on a smaller structure, and we use this as an intro to kit building for any novices that were out there. But we did a lot of masking, so we have a lot of kind of buff color and darker, sort of a Pullman green on these two walls, on this one wall section. So I think this came out really nice. So these two structures are complementary to each other. They are going to go on the layout for the same era. So I can run a lot of steam. But if I want to run diesel or newer diesel or not Pennsylvania Railroad at all, then we may not want to have these. We may want to use something that is updated a little bit more. So what we're going to do is, since this kit comes with two crossing shanties, we're going to build the second one, but we're going to build it to appear as a more modern structure. So we're going to do a lot of things for that. So again, to just backtrack, this was episode 27, this is episode 29. We're now going to film episode 32. So our crossing shanty is going to end up looking a lot more like this. It's going to have a maintenance of gray color on it, and we're going to build this out as if it was not currently in operation. So we don't really need the instructions, and we really don't need the box or anything. So we're going to retire that, largely because we've already built one. This is not a difficult building, and all the pieces are pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to make the wall alignments. Remember, in this episode we talked about the placement and the order and things like that. We're going to leave the walls exactly the same. So if we decide that we want to take this structure off of our layout and replace it with the identical structure, but updated for, say, the 70s or 80s, we can just replace the two, and it'll appear like the scene has gone forward in time. So now we're probably going to do the same thing with this structure as well, because while I like the way this looks, the current tower doesn't look like this. So the tower that I referenced in New Jersey is boarded up, and it's a lot more faded. You can see everything looks great. It looks brand new and freshly painted, and rarely do the buildings look like that. So to get started, we're going to build this smaller structure. We've already cleaned up all of the pieces. I've got my stair assembly here. I've got my top floor, my bottom floor, the roofs, and the foundation, and then all the sheds. We're going to do those as well. What we need to do is we need to assemble this, but we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to paint some of this structure because we want to wear off some of the paint. So we're going to paint some of this structure to appear exactly how it appears here, but we don't have to be quite so precise because it's all going to be covered by a maintenance gray color. And then once that's done, we can go and chip away at some of the paint, and we'll reveal some of the original paint underneath. But we're not going to do that much of it, so we're going to have a little bit of wear and tear in this building where the gray comes off. So we can plan where we want to do that, and the rest of the building we don't have to do that to. So we don't have to do a lot of precise masking. We don't have to do a lot of cover the entire building with this color. The stairs, we're going to color the stairs the same green, but again, only in the areas where we think we're going to use some wear and tear, maybe on the tops of the railings and the feet of the stairs, but underneath is going to stay gray. It's not really going to wear that much. So, and then the windows, we plan on boarding up the windows. We're going to do a lot of other little things, and we'll get into that in the video. So anyway, let's get started. We need to build this before we can start wearing it. So we're going to go ahead and start the construction phase. We're going to speed through that. If you really want to see how this is built, you really need to go back to this episode, which is a novice episode. But I would suggest that you view that if you're new, and then you can jump back over and watch what we're going to do and basically make that thing look worn out and ugly. So, all right, let's get started building. Okay, at this point we've got the 8-sided structure put together, and it has been glued, and then just a base coat of that buff color. So essentially this section and this section have been painted with the buff color. What we want to do is we want to tape off a few of these vertical sections and paint those green, and then remove all of the masking tape, and then photograph that, because that's going to give us a guide of where we can wear paint off. We're not going to go ahead and paint the entire structure like this and then paint it another color. That'd be kind of a lot of work that we're just going to hide. So what we're going to do is we're going to just selectively paint areas that we know we're going to wear off in detail. So to give you an idea, this is the base bottom floor, and I haven't trimmed everything on here. You can see that I've only done a couple of vertical sections and around the door. Around the door is going to be probably a focal point, so we want to do that. The rest of this is just some vertical sections that we may wear off some paint, but that's about it. So we're going to go ahead and shoot this green, pull off the masking tape, see how it looks, see if we need to do any touch-up. Then if we're happy with it, then we'll go to the next stage of weathering. Alright, so in each of the videos I try to pass on something that I do which maybe would help somebody if they're doing this for the first time. So let's talk about masking. So essentially we want to mask something like this off so that it looks like this when we're done. So it's really pretty simple. So I use just regular painter's tape, Scotch brand tape, but this is much too large to try to mask something off before we paint it. So to make it a little more manageable, I'll lay a piece of Scotch tape out just on a piece of glass, and I've had this for years and years and years. Put electrical tape or some sort of tape around the outside, because if it's not sanded around the outside, it is glass and it will have a sharp edge. So that electrical tape has been on here for decades. So lay a piece of Scotch tape out, cut a lot of vertical strips. If you lay this on a craft board like this that already has a grid on it, you can use a straight edge ruler or just a plastic triangle. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, and cut vertical lines, and you have the lines of the grid on the mat to keep this relatively vertical. It doesn't have to be perfect, because all you really want is that one straight edge. And then when you're done, you're just going to take the piece of tape up. Easier said than done, right? And you're just going to lie it down here on the edge, and it's almost perfect fit. Alright, so this can take a second or two to get placed precisely. Then once you have it fit in a place like this, we're going to align it as well as we can. It's a miracle that I actually had a piece of tape. I did not cut this in advance. It was just one that was happened to be on the glass. Get it placed pretty well, and you're probably going to end up cutting an edge. Don't cut down into the color you want to protect. Cut down onto onto the trim board like this. You don't want to cut straight down into the paint you want to keep. You want to cut down into the paint that you're probably going to mask over. And then once you're fairly close and you're happy with it, you can either use your fingernail to seat it. Yeah, it's almost perfect. And then I will go over with either a bamboo skewer or a toothpick. A lot of times I'll use a toothpick. What's really important here is that you apply a light coat of spray paint, probably 4 or 5 coats. I tend to mist it quite a bit. I won't put a heavy duty layer on. And we're going to have to trim that just a little bit. So what's the most important piece of this is that as you get the masking tape right along the edge where you want it, that there's no paint that seeps down underneath the tape. So that's what the toothpick is going to do. It's going to give us a nice solid rub along those edges. And this thing has a little bit of siding piece on it, so it's irregular. So let me make sure this is good. Okay, and this piece up here needs to be trimmed just a little bit. You really want to use a sharp blade here, and my blade may actually need to be changed. I've been doing a lot of masking with this. Okay, it's a really, really thin piece of tape. Lost my tweezers. Alright, so at this point we're going to go with it. I think it looks pretty good. I know you probably can't see the level of detail that I'm putting on here, but you want to get this to adhere around the outside. On the inside of this area that you're trying to protect, it doesn't matter if the tape sticks down there at all. But it definitely is important that you want to have the tape stick down all around the edges where you're about to paint, because we're protecting this color. Okay, so next step in our weathering of the structure here is we're going to basically do some chip weathering. We've got these two structures that have been sprayed with hairspray. We didn't do any salt this time. All we did was hairspray. So we're going to have to scrub at these and get some of the color off. So this is essentially what the shed looked like back in its heyday, and we've got the interlocking and block tower that matches this. This is what it looks like now. You notice it's been painted a maintenance of way gray, but you'll see on the door there's a lot of wear, but there's also some paint flaking off. So what we had to do is we had to scrub with a toothbrush fairly aggressively on this, and a lot of that has to do with the thickness of the paint that I applied. And you can see that there's some chipping here. Right on this side right here. Now I didn't chip any of the trim boards because I never painted those green. and I want this shed to be a replacement for the shed. On this side, same thing. There's a lot of chipping right along in here. Didn't really do the back very much, just because I didn't think it was going to be seen. So that's the sheds. Let's talk about the coal bins. So this is the coal bin that's just got a lot of dirt and grime and coal dust on it. So this is the one that would have been in use. This one got painted gray, wasn't really used that much, didn't really have any dirt on it because it was ceased to be used, but it did get some of the maintenance of way gray on it. There's some wear here. It has a lot more wear on the front, just because that's going to be the side that is going to be predominantly seen. And that's really it for the coal bin. Not even sure if I'm going to place it or not, if it would still be in existence, but it's weathered nonetheless. So we now have these two pieces, the bottom and top of the structure. Now again, this is going to be a replacement. It's going to go about like that. This is going to be the replacement for the other crossing shanty. So we want to essentially have this structure wear, and there is green underneath here, and there's the buff color underneath here. So we're going to wear some of these panels down. But again, this structure was painted over those colors, so we just want to show some wear and tear, kind of like what we did on the side of the shanty here. So to do this, we're going to use a toothbrush. We're going to take these structures, and at this point I'm pretty much going to just submerge them because the level of paint that I had put on them I think was a bit heavy. So just trying to get it to cover all the cracks and everything. So I did tape up the windows to make sure there wasn't any overspray when I did it, but I'm just leaving the tape on for now for the heck of it. So I have a X-Acto knife if I need it. I'm probably not going to use it because that's fairly aggressive, and I want to make sure that there's no scrape marks or anything like that. I also have a couple of toothpicks that I can use to go at it. Now it's probably going to take a little while to get this paint to come off because we need to submerge it just to get the underlying hairspray. However, I'm going to start the process with just a few little light scrapes here and there. Now I took photos of where I was going to come after the underlying paint. So I know that it's this vertical member, this panel, around the door vertically. I didn't paint right here. I painted here green and here green. I can't remember if I did this one. So I did take photos of all four sides of this building just so I knew where to scrape. So let's put on the good old glasses. So this video may get a little long just because I'm going to show you the entire process here. And as I scrape, I can get a little bit of paint to come off. I assume that the bottom of this structure is probably going to wear more than the top. Closer to the ground, this has a roof over it, so we'll see what results we get. I'm not really interested in the top of it wearing, maybe a little bit on the door, but that's about it. And again, since I didn't paint the green around the windows or any trim or hinges or whatever, essentially the entire top is a buff color. So as far as I'm concerned, we're going to kind of leave it fairly mild. So what I want is I want the water to get underneath this top layer of paint, and I want it to get down into the layer of hairspray. Hairspray is water soluble, so what's going to happen is the hairspray is going to start to have the water seep down into it. It's going to loosen up, and once it loosens up, it's going to separate itself from the buff color base color that we sprayed, or the green if it was the trim. And once it does that, the paint that's on top of it, this maintenance away gray, it's going to start to come off the surface of the structure, which is what we want. So we're going to get the paint peel effect as soon as that happens. Now, I've seen some people have to wait quite a long time, depending on how long it takes for the paint to, the hairspray to dissolve and the paint to basically come up. And they look for a little bit of texture change in the top layer of paint. So we may cut some of this out. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a few just little marks, because I want the paint on top to separate. So, and apologize if I'm repeating myself, but there's not a lot else going on here. So we're gonna let these soak, and once they stop soaking and come out, they'll we'll start to see some of the paint kind of bubbling up, crinkling up off that. So once we're done and the structure has that effect on it, then we can finish putting it all together. I've already got the roof sections painted a similar lighter gray like this, and I'm going to add some additional roof staining on it. The roof sections that I've already painted, I've given it a lighter shade of gray, but then I've washed it with a little bit of diluted white paint as well. So I like the effect of what it looks like, but I think I might want to go a little more on the light fade that I've got. Also, the section here that has the smoke jacks coming out of it, I'm probably going to put a little bit of rust on those, actually probably a lot of rust on those, and then have that come down off that roof section as well. So, you know, now that we are talking about that, I could probably even do a little bit off the hinges and the door handles and things like that too if I wanted to, but that's going to be pretty minor for us to look at. So let's skip ahead and let's take a look at this once the paint's starting to separate. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. I'm not sure how well this is going to come out, but there's a little bit of bubbling happening along the paint where it looks like the hairspray is starting to dissolve just a little bit. That might be a little too blurry, but hopefully this comes out. I'm going to take this one out for now, but it is getting that effect. It is bubbling up a little bit, so Now I'm going to stay away from the very top and the very bottom because none of those areas got painted that green underneath. So I'll start doing this kind of lightly at first. And again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to replicate the crossing shanty. I want it to look like the crossing shanty, just painted and weathered. So we'll see. Now keep in mind that the maintenance away gray, it was painted over hairspray, so I shouldn't have a problem of wearing the green and the buff color off. Obviously, if I do this long enough, it's going to wear off, but so depending on how thick you paint the top coat of paint over the hairspray will determine how aggressively you have to go at it. Just what I've done already, you can see that there's a little bit of green coming off, or I'm sorry, there's a little bit of the gray coming off, and you can see the green underneath it. You can also see a little bit of yellow along in here on this surface, and it's starting to come up. So it's looking good. I'm going to keep it wet because it's throw the other guy back in. Let him cook for a little longer. If you guys want to skip ahead in the video and see how it looks, I don't blame you, but I wanted to have the entire process. So if somebody's new to this, then you guys can just bear with me and see the whole process. It's kind of hard to get inside the door here. One other thing is, so we talked about using toothpicks, so we're going to try to use toothpicks. There's paint chips starting to float in the water, so that's a good sign. Make sure that it's a little bit of paint coming off the back here. Now you can definitely overdo some things, but then you can definitely not do it enough. Like right here, I'm getting pretty good wear and tear. Now I poked that spot right there with an X-Acto blade, and that's the reason why I got such a good chunk coming off right here. That's a pretty good spot. Now if you think about HO scale, you want to do things to scale. You want to weather things to scale too. So think about how big a chunk that would be in HO scale. I mean, that's about the size of a guy's, guy's bigger than a person's hand. So bigger, almost as big as their head. So picture, there's your hand. That's as big of a bare spot. So we probably want to leave that spot alone for now. We're going to move on. Smaller spot right there, just above it. So I kind of like the way that looks. So we're going to leave that one alone. We're just going to go across some of these panels and see if there's any. Yeah, I don't think I really scraped much with a blade right there. So we started with the toothbrush here, and it takes almost nothing for me to get a good chunk of paint coming off of here. So hopefully you can see this better, but I just scraped off this whole section here. You can see the yellow underneath. There's some pretty good flakes there. So at this point I'm probably overdoing it, so I'm gonna just hit real light until I get a flake. And don't forget, since this is a layer of paint over hairspray and it flakes up pretty good, it's just gray paint. if we want to put something else over it, like more gray paint, then we can do so, and it doesn't have any negative effect on anything that we're doing. All it does is cover it up and look like something else got painted over it. So I'm going to feel my way around the building now. My wife teases me because I hate wood spoons. The texture and the feel. She's like, well, what about toothpicks? And I'm like, toothpicks are fine. What about working with wood, building things? Oh, that's fine. That's different. What about a wood spoon? I don't know what it is about wood spoons. I was probably beaten with a wood spoon as a child, which is a reason why it's a problem. So it seems like at this point that the hairspray is getting so thin, or is dissolving so much, that I can kind of do what I want to with it. And I'm just kind of feeling around for spots where maybe the paint might start to come off, and as soon as I feel it, then I stop. So there's a section right there that I have. So I've got some wood chips, some paint chips by the door. I've got a lot of yellow showing through here, a little bit of green on the trim, and I'm going to stop there. I'm moving on. I'm not going to tempt fate. Not much is bubbling up over here. It also has a little bit different feel. And you'll notice that you're going to want to wear the paint off a board at a time, because that's probably how the paint is going to wear off the building. If anything, these paint chips are probably bigger than I would want normally. It starts to feel not quite so firm as you hit spots. Whoa. Yeah, like I just got a big chunk of green there, so probably further down I'm gonna find the same thing. Yep. Okay, so I kind of like what it's doing, but I want to do a more gentle effect, and I did this with the shed a little bit. I take the very tip of the blade and I just scrape really lightly, and after a while you get a touch for it. You can tell just the very edge of the board, and I don't want to do the same spot in more than one board. In other words, I want the paint to wear differently in different spots in different siding boards. I'm being very careful not to go, just to go through the gray and not down deeper. Not down deeper than the yellow. I don't want to scrape any of the yellow. It's definitely tricky. There's an art to this. If I did scrape deeper than the yellow, all that would happen is it would be a gray of the plastic, the molding. So it wouldn't be a huge problem. So the edge trim boards are actually a little easier to do just because the edges of the green painted boards, they ride up a little higher in the mold. So at this point it's getting pretty easy to put chips on, just because the hairspray underneath is definitely starting to get affected. So whatever I can do that's really subtle is what I need to do. The other thing about this is if you're going to paint a structure like this and you want to do an undercoat of yellow and a top coat of maintenance gray, it's going to be difficult to see. You will, I mean, if you get a close-up photography shot, and then you're going to be able to notice it. But honestly, if you are looking at two light color tones, I mean, I can show you in the camera, but it's going to be very difficult to see. So we're going to do a couple little quick jabs. Trying to do it as vertical as I can, figuring that there's going to be some wear. The paint, the boards have grains that run vertical up and down. So the chances that if you go and look at a old shed, you're probably going to see grain patterns in the wood and in the wear. So I'm trying to mimic that. At this point, I really don't want to scrub it with a toothbrush because I'm kind of afraid what's going to happen. I mean, I don't want to take off a 6-foot piece of paint. If I do that, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to come back and paint again. So now when I painted vertical strips up the siding, up the trim boards. And when I painted up the trim boards, I did the vertical pieces, but I didn't come back around and paint this piece. Once the roof gets on there, it snugs down pretty tight on it, so you really won't notice it anyway. But I'm only stripping paint a few places that I know that I can get the colors underneath that I want. Now, if you wanted to, and if you had a lot of time on your hands, you could go and paint this entire structure underneath just like you did the original structure. But dear God, what a waste of paint and your time. I don't know that would be worth it. It would probably be the right way to do it if you were going to see this structure from 360 degrees, but that would be about the only reason I can think of. And I'm planning to place this structure so that I can see both doorways. But the back side of it's probably not going to get seen, which is why I didn't really do much weathering or paint chipping on the shed, on the back side of the shed. I don't plan on the back side of the shed to be seen. So, and if it is, I could just go back and scrape at it. So, let me see if you can see this. Let me look in the camera and see if this comes out. But you can see there's a lot of chipping. If anything, there's probably more chipping than what we want. But just to make this visual, I want you to be able to see. And you can see there's places where the trim that I could probably go back and touch up that spot a little bit. But until I get the entire structure put back together, I don't know if I like that big spot or not. So I'll do a little bit more on the bottom of the door. The bottom of the door is probably going to get banged up and hit more than the top of the door. So we definitely don't want it to be completely clean while the top, the extreme top of the door is a mess. Alright. You know, like some things, you know, the more you pick at it, the worse it's going to look. So I think I'm getting to the point where I need to stop. There's a couple of sides that are missing any type of abuse, so I'll add a little bit more. And again, this is really where you ought to be using a paint scraper or a dowel or what do I want to say, a toothpick, but also a like a skewer. You know, one of those things you use for cooking. It's a sharpened wooden, very large toothpick. Let's just call it what it is. All right. Yeah, and I'm really reluctant to scrape at this much, other than to get the loose paint chips off. But this looks pretty good. Alright, I know if I mess with this much more, I'm not going to like it. So I'm done. So we're going to do the same thing on the top. Yeah, and this thing's been soaking for a while. These are coming off in pretty big chunks. So I'm going to do about a patch, a panel. Move around it pretty quick. Got to remember what's yellow underneath and what's supposed to be green. Yeah, it is so saturated that it takes almost nothing. It's been soaking for probably a good 10 minutes. Alright. I said I was going to stop and I'm not. So I'm going to stop. Alright, we're going to brush some of the loose pieces off. And again, I'm not scrubbing it like I was. I was getting really aggressive. And this I'm just kind of lightly, I want to get the pieces off that I've already removed. And that's it. Alright. So I'm pretty happy with that. The front's pretty scraped up. If anything, these are probably bigger pieces than I need. So we're going to let this dry. I'm going to take off the masking tape so you can get a better feel for what this is going to look like. Whoa. Almost had an accident there. Alright. If you guys are still watching, you guys are troopers. Alright. So, paint chips all over my fingers. That's a good sign, I guess. Alright, so that's essentially what the bottom's going to look like. It's pretty chipped up. We get done, we'll take some stills, and this will be better when the whole thing's put together. So we'll definitely do some comparison shots between this structure and the one that it's supposedly replacing. So, all right, so that's going to do it for this segment. I'm going to dry that up, and once that's all dried, then, which will probably take a few minutes, then I'm going to start assembling, and that's essentially gluing these two pieces together with the roof, this section on top, then this piece, and the roof. Oops. So it looks a lot more like the picture on the box, but we're doing a lot of extra stuff. So we'll get some of that assembled, and then we'll talk about some of the other things we're going to do to make this look aged. Okay, so if you haven't seen episode 29, that was the episode that we built the crossing shanty. So check that out if you're curious to see how to build this. So this is essentially what we are aging. So this is the first kit, the first crossing shanty that was in the kit. So there's different components to this that we're going to address. So actually, before I could start gluing everything together, I had to come up with a way to cover up the windows, because I was covering up the windows on the base section, and once I glue the roof on, there's no way to get to it. So I couldn't assemble it and then start doing all the details. So here's what we did. We glued a couple of wood panels in so that we could have boarded up windows on the ground floor. So that's one thing that we did. The next level is the roof section. And this one, we just had to add some weathering here and there down the sides in some spots just to differentiate it. And again, this is a faded roof compared to what looks to be more like a recently applied and tar papered roof on the period one, the 1940s era, we'll call it. The next level up is that floor. Door is boarded up on the inside, so we had to do that now. And the windows are all boarded up on the outside, and these are just basically stained. So they're all cut the same. And now we're up to the roof. So again, we did the faded paint job. We did the staining around the sides, and the smoke jack on here is different than this one. This top piece here is actually snapped off on this one and is missing. So there's some differences there. Oops, I better be careful. I'm going to be repairing things as I go. The stairway is just painted maintenance gray. We didn't really change it much. However, there is a broken step in here. Right about there. Pictures help, I know. And then there's an air conditioner that I had from an old kit. So this is a wooden kit that I had built previously, and I really liked it, but I didn't like the air conditioner, and it came out of this kit. So now I'm using it. So that's all the stuff that we've done to age it. There's a few other things that I had thought of doing, but if you decided you wanted to add something in addition to that, I had talked possibly about taking the doors and putting an X across them in boards. I'd also talked possibly about taking out a section of railing and then splicing in a piece of just stained wood instead. But I decided I'm not sure that some of the stuff that I wanted to add was really going to add a lot of value. So I just stuck with what I just showed you. So I could probably do a little bit more weathering on it as far as discoloration, but it's already got some pretty heavy chip peeling on it. I decided to leave that alone. Also, possibly broken glass. If you wanted to, you could do some of the downstairs windows and turn those into boarded up behind the glass and then shatter the glass. I thought about doing that, but again, I decided I think that what I'm going to end up with is a tower that's going to look really more contemporary than this one. So if I want to, I can just, wherever this one sits, just pull this one out, drop the other one in, and boom, I'm off into a much later period, possibly more of a diesel era before this building's torn down. So I'm going to finish putting this building together. It's basically gluing the floors to the roof, gluing the stairs on the side, and sticking the air conditioner on a blank wall section, and then that's it. And then I'll show some stills of comparing the two structures. So, alrighty, let's glue that together, and then I'll show you the final. Alright guys, congratulations, you made it to the end. I know you thought it was never going to end, right? So I appreciate your comments. I appreciate you subscribing. Make sure you click the bell icon if you do subscribe so you get updates for my next video. I got a stack of stuff that I haven't even touched yet that I am planning on working on next. So I just got to figure out. The desk is clean. It's always a good sign. So I can start fresh. And again, I'm Michael McCarville. This is Fun with Fallen Flags, episode 32. I really appreciate you guys watching the video, and I look forward to seeing you again on episode 33. Thanks, you guys. Have a great one.